Before we begin Chavches Amid Beis, we have a few Gemaras here on Chavches Amid Aleph in the bottom, which we didn't finish. So we'll start with Rava Amar Mehacha, which is approximately, I'd say, about 10 lines up before the end of the Amud. And Rava is going to suggest an alternative source for not gazing at the face of a Rasha, Mehacha. And he based himself on a pasuk in Mishlei, Se'es Pnei Rasha Loto, which we can translate as to pay attention to the face of a wicked person is not a good thing. Chas Pti Raso. Now we're getting back to Rebbe and Rabbi Yeshua. So at the time of his departure from Rabbi Yeshua, Omar Lo, Rebbe said to him, Rebbe Barcheni, give me my teacher a blessing. Omar Lo, Rabbi Yeshua responded, Yiratzon shtagia lechatzi yoma, that you attain half of my days. So Rebbe asked him, Ulakulu Lo, why not give me a bracha for all the days? Why half the days? This is like very stingy on your part. Give me the full measure of your longevity. Omar Lo, abayim acharecha behemo yiro. If you live as long as I live, then your children will not be able to follow in your footsteps and inherit your greatness. You will continue as Nasi, and your sons shall remain commoners all their lives. Now the Gemara tells us how an Amora would conduct himself in the matter of gazing. Avua bar ihi umin yamin bar ihi. Chad Amar once said, Tasili to lo estakli bekusi. I'll be rewarded in Olam Haba because I never gazed at an idol worshiper, Kusi. And Chad Amar, Tasili, I should be rewarded in the world to come. To lo avdi shutvis bahadi kusi. I never had a partnership with a Kusi. The Gemara in Masechet Brachos, in Masechet Bechoros on Daf Beis Amid Beis, prohibits entering into a partnership with an idol worshiper because the idolater might swear in the name of his idol in the event of a dispute between partners. And this Amora was extremely scrupulous and refrained from forming a partnership even when permitted, such as when a Jew stipulated beforehand that the partner would be exonerated from taking an oath. Shalu Talmidav Rabbi Zera Bamer Achtal Yomim. I never got angry in my house, and surely not outside my house. A person may establish himself as an authority figure in his home, instilling a modicum of fear and reverence in the members of his house, and nevertheless, Rabbi Zera was careful never to act in a way that he became angry. I never walked in front of someone who's greater than me. I always gave kavod to someone who's a greater person. And lower harti b'mavos hamitunafos. I never thought about Torah in an alleyway that is mitunaf. It has tsoa in it. And the Gemara in Brachos on Daf Chav Daled Amud Beis establishes that we are not permitted to think Torah thoughts in proximity of feces or urine. Rabbi Zera considered his observance of this stricture especially worthy of merit because it's difficult for many people to achieve this. And the Rashba writes that according to one view, it's forbidden only to enter to other words of Torah, but not thinking Torah. And Rabbi Zera went la halacha, and he passed like that day, but nevertheless he was strict on himself not even to think, not to be mahare of b'makom hamitunov. Below Torah, below tefillin. No one ever saw him walk 4 cubits, 4 amos without Torah or without tefillin. He was constantly involved in thoughts of Torah, and he was never mesiach das from Torah. Always engaged in Torah study. I never slept in a Beis Medrash. Lo chenas kvav, lo chenas haroy. He was machmir for himself not even to take a nap in a house of study. And that means he was more scrupulous than what was required according to strict law, where you're allowed to doze off. Velosasti b'takol chaveri, I was never happy at the stumbling of my fellow Jew. Now, actually, we derive from Mishlei Chavdalid that it's forbidden to rejoice in another's misfortune. The pasuk says, "When your enemy falls, be not glad, and when he stumbles, be not joyous." However, the pasuk there speaks about an enemy. Rabbi Zera was careful not to rejoice even when the cause was not enmity, but a legitimate personal gain. Hence, if one buys very cheaply from his fellow, he should not derive joy from the other person's loss. V'lo karasi lechaveri, and the girsa here that we have is b'chanichasa, which is a nickname. That comes from the root word kinui, a nickname. The Amri la b'chanichaso, nor did I ever call my fellow by his surname, if it had a negative connotation. And this leads us to the Mishnah here on the bottom of Chav Ches Amud Al, 4 lines up before the end of the Amud. The Odom Rabbi Yehuda, Beis Knesset Shecharev, if the synagogue was in ruins, it still has its Kedusha, and therefore, Ein Maspidim B'tocho, for ordinary people, we don't eulogize in a shul, Ve'en Mafshilim B'toch Avolim, one may not twist ropes in it, the Ein Parsin L'tocho Mitsudos, no spread nets in it, and these twisted ropes were apparently for the purpose of work, and twisting ropes and spreading nets, which is a large uncluttered synagogue building, is the ideal place to perform such labors, but we don't do labor in a shul. And certainly not to spread nets in a shul. The ancient al gago peiros, spread fruits to dry on the roof. Even the roof of a shul has sanctity, may not be used for profane purposes. Ve'inosin kapadria, and you don't use the shul as a shortcut. And again, all these isurim that are listed here in the Mishnah apply to any shul that is functioning, even if it's been abandoned. Shenemar and the pasuk we see in Sefer Vayikra says, "Vashimosias mikdash shechem kedushasan af kishein shomim." Even when they're desolate, their sanctity still remains, even when they lie in ruin. Olubo asavim is grass sprouts in the ruined synagogue. Lo yitlosh mipnei agmas nefesh. This is an expression of grief. And the sight of a shul that's overrun with grass will remind people of when the shul was functioning and how they would congregate there. And this will lead, says Rashi, to beseech Almighty God to restore the site to its former purpose. So I said to you before that ein osin oso kapandria and all the other isurim that are enumerated in the Mishnah apply if it's a functioning synagogue. Actually, that's a mistake. It means even if it's not functioning, even if the shul has been abandoned, nevertheless, these isurim apply. Tana Rabbana, we learned to the Brisa. Bate kinesios ein noagim bohen kalus rosh. We're not allowed to do things of levity in a shul, to jest or mock or engage in an idle conversation. A shul is considered miktas migdash ma'at, a miniature Beis HaMikdash. And regarding the Beis HaMikdash, the Torah commands us, my sanctuary you shall revere Mora Migdash, or before the one who is present in the edifice.
and that awe should be felt by those who are inside the shul. We learned in the Rice about the we don't eat them. They ain't chosen by him. Now we're on Daf Chav Ches Amid Beis. We don't beautify ourselves inside of a shul. We don't stroll around in a shul. We don't go in there to relieve ourselves from the beating down of the heat of gshamim, or to enter into the shul to protect us from the gshamim. We do not eulogize for an individual inside a shul, aval korin bahen, but we could read from the Torah. In other words, although it's designated for the mitzvah of tefillah, we can use it also for Torah study. V'shonim b'hem, we learn mishnayos. Maspidim b'hem hesped shel rabim, a public eulogy. The Gemara is going to talk about the death of a Torah scholar, a Talmid Chacham. The townspeople assemble for his eulogy, and the shul is an appropriate site because of its great size. So we'll have examples later on in the Gemara of a public eulogy. Rabbi Yehuda, Emasai, when does this rule apply? B'Shuvan, when they are still in use as a synagogue. Aval b'churbanam, when they are desolate, manichin osan v'olim b'masavim v'lo yitlash. We leave the shul alone. The grass is allowed to grow, and we don't uproot the grass in order to inspire grief and mourning. It sounds like Rabbi Yehuda was relating to the grass, but nothing was mentioned earlier about the grass. So the first Tana did not discuss some obligation to keep the grass growing. So right, we sweep out the shul. Again, we're talking about shuls that are being used. Umar bitzin osan, and we sprinkle water on the floor to cause the dust to settle. Omar Rabbi Yehuda emasai b'shuvan, as long as they're still in use. Aval b'churbanam, if they are desolate, manichin osan lalos, and it sounds like that's a requirement. It's actually a chiyuv, an obligation, to allow the growth of grass in the shuls. Rabbi Yehuda, Amosai, when does this apply? B'Shuvan. So again, Mechabdin osan and Marbitzin osan k'dei shelo yalu ben asov. Rabbi Yehuda, Amosai b'Shuvan av v'churbanam manichin osan lalos, and then olu bahem asovim lo yitlosh. We don't uproot the grass with me'ag mas nefesh in order to inspire mourning and grief. When they build a shul in Bavel, they make a t'nai. And that t'nai is that they be allowed to use the shul for general use. Rashi interprets that this t'nai is only valid once the shul has been abandoned. As long as the shul is in use, then all the isurim that we mentioned apply. That despite the t'nai that they made, the condition is valid only for synagogues in Chutz La'aretz, since their sanctity will anyway be nullified when Mashiach comes. By contrast, the sanctity of shuls in Eretz Yisrael is eternal. Even though we made this t'nai, and now the shul is not in use, nevertheless, kalas rosh is prohibited. Ma'aninu, what do you have in mind by kalas rosh? Cheshbonos. And we're talking about ordinary business calculations.
Omar Avasi, Beis HaKnesses Shemachashvin Bo Cheshbonos. He's going to show how severe of a violation this is if he does these calculations. The Shul Malina Bo as a mess. Then eventually what's going to happen is they're going to bring a corpse to stay overnight in that Beis HaKnesses. Malinin Sal Kedaitach, Lo Sagi Dlav Hachi. Do you really take this literally? That they will house corpses in it overnight? In other words, Ravasi is saying that the corpses should be kept overnight in the synagogue. That's a very strange obligation. Ella lesof she'alinu bo meis mitzvah. Not that we are, commanded to keep a corpse overnight, but unfortunately, that's what's going to happen. And this might be referring to what we call a mes mitzvah, a corpse without any relatives to attend to its burial. And burial, therefore, becomes the obligation of anyone who encounters the corpse. And people have no relatives to attend their burial will die in that town, thereby obligating the townspeople to perform the burial. And in cases where burial cannot take place immediately, the townspeople will be forced to use their synagogue as a morgue. And this constitutes a punishment for the improper use of the synagogue. The Eini Osim Bahem. The Brisa said that you're not allowed to adorn yourself inside the Shulam or Rava Chacham v'Talmidei Mutarim. However, the Talmid Chacham who spends long hours, right, in the Beis HaMedrash, the special heter from Domer Rabbi Shubin Levi, my Beis Rabbanon. Why do we call a Beis Medrash a Beis Rabbanon, the house of the Rabbanon, Beis Rabbanon? It's the home for the Rabbanon, for the Torah scholars. The Talmidei Chachamim are at home there. That's why they're permitted to use the study hall for all of their needs. The ein nechnosim behem b'cham b'nei cham b'gshom b'shnei gshomim ki had Ravina Rav Ada bar Ava havakaime v'shayle she'iltame Rava. So there's a story here with Ravina Rav Ada, who was standing and asking a question to Rava. Osa zilcha demitra. There was a downpour of rain. Aili lebei knishta, and they entered into that synagogue seemingly to escape from being drenched in the rain. But when asked apparently about it, because we don't go into a shul to protect ourselves from the rain, Amri, they responded, "Hi, the ayinah beis knishta love misham mitra. We didn't enter because of the rain. Ela mishum deshmaita be'at silusa." When the halachic discussion requires clarity, silusa means clarity, the kiyoma, the isra, like a day in which there's a north wind. So in order to engage in halachic discourse, one needs a calm and uncluttered mind. Had they remained in the downpour, these Amoraim would have become distracted. So they didn't use the synagogue for personal nature, but rather in order to learn Torah. And this north wind brings sunny, pleasant weather. Amalei Rav Acha b'rei de Rav Ravash. If a person has to call someone out of the synagogue, what should he do? You're not allowed to enter into a synagogue for any other purpose except to study or pray. Can we circumvent this prohibition in a case where there's necessity? Amalei Rav Ashi responded, Itzurmi Rabbananu. If the person who's calling to his friend is a young scholar, Lema Hilchasa, he should enter into the shul, recite a halacha, and that indicates that his purpose in entering the shul is to study Torah. Itanahu, if he's just a student of the Mishnah, Lema Masnisa, let him recite a Mishnah. The Ikara, who if he is just a simple student of scriptures, lema psuka. V'lo, if he's not able to even do that, and he's got to go in there to call someone out, then lemole lianuka, he should tell a child, Emily psuke, what pasuk did you learn presently? Inami nishi purta v'nekum, or he should tarry a while in the shul and then get up and leave, because tarrying in a shul is a mitzvah. This is based on Tehillim Pei Dalet. Praiseworthy are those who dwell in your house. What is a public eulogy? Machvile, Rav Chizda motioned, indicating that Kegon Espeda the Koi Bei Rav Sheshes. Now, literally translated, that means a eulogy at which Rav Sheshes was present. In Machvi Rav Sheshes, Kegon Espeda the Koi Bei Rav Chizda. A eulogy at which Rav Chizda is present. If a relative or member of Rav Sheshes' household were to die, his eulogy would constitute a public eulogy. The entire town would assemble in Rav Sheshes' honor. Now Rashi has the Koi Bei Rav Sheshes, a eulogy which is at the household of Rav Sheshes, meaning the deceased was a member of Rav Sheshes' household. Rafram Aspedol Kalose, never he lost his daughter-in-law, Bebei Knishta. In the synagogue, he eulogized his daughter-in-law. Omar, Bishum Yikar Didi Udemisa, in the honor of the deceased, Asu Kule Alma, the entire community will come up, they'll make a show, and it becomes a public eulogy, which is permitted in a synagogue. Rav Zera also likewise delivered a hesped for the loss of a Talmud Chacham, and it was inside the shul. Omar, he declared, Imi Shum Yikar Didi, either in my honor or Imi Shum Yikar Didi the Misa, for the honor of the deceased, Asu Kuliyalma. Everyone's going to come out to this eulogy, and therefore it is a hespeda de Rab. Rav Sheshes delivered a eulogy on behalf of a Talmud Chacham who used to frequent Eretz Yisrael. He wasn't a full-time resident of Eretz Yisrael, and the Gemara wants to emphasize that although a Talmud Chacham who is not a countryman of Reish Lakish, nevertheless, Reish Lakish eulogized him effusively. When he taught halachas, there were 24 rows of students. Omar, Reish Lakish said about this Talmud Chacham, Vai, whoa, Chasra Arad Yisrael Gavarab, the land of Israel has lost a great man. Ahuda Vitani Hilchas Sifra V'Sifri V'Tosefta V'Shachiv. This was a great scholar. He knew Sifra, Sifri, Tosefta, and he died. Asu V'Amrle Rav Nachman told Rav Nachman Lispede Mar. Perhaps our master of Nachman would deliver the eulogy. Omar Hechi Naspede. How could I possibly give him a eulogy? Hait Sana Demori Sifri De Chaser. Whoa, a basket full of sacred books has been lost. What is Rav Nachman implying over here? The scholar possessed vast amounts of information, like a basket holding many books, but he did not fully comprehend the material. He never acquired the tools of analysis by submitting himself to Shimush Talmidei Chachamim. Therefore, he failed to grasp the reasoning behind the rulings, was unable to deal with difficult or conflicting texts, and Rav Nachman did not regard him as a bona fide scholar. Now, the Gemara has an unfavorable comparison and contrast between Rav Nachman and Reish Lakish, Tochazi, Maben Tkifi, the scholars of Ard Yisrael, of Eretz Yisrael, Chasidei de Bavel. In the case of the Chasidei of the Tkifei Ard Yisrael, like Reish Lakish, just one second, let me the Hebrew translation is helpful over here. Ma bein talmidei chacham hachazokim kifei shel Eretz Yisrael chasidi de Bavel chasim shel Bavel. Reish Lakish af shehaya migdolei Eretz Yisrael mikom kom haya anvasan. He was humble. The hispidus also Talmud Chacham. V'ilu Rav Nachman haya mechasidi Bavel lo rotza lahaspidus at Talmud Chacham kevin to lo shimesh talmidei chacham. Also, Talmud Chacham shehispid Reish Lakish lo haya mibnei Eretz Yisrael rak shchiach bi'arad Yisrael. Ukmo chen haya lo meid rak mishnayos v'lo braysos. So mikom makom haya Reish Lakish maspido she'Eretz Yisrael chasera adam gadol. V'ilu Talmud Chacham shelo rotza Rav Nachman laspido haya mibnei Bavel v'nam lovet es kol habraysos. V'lo rotza Rav Nachman laspido v'lo omar shechasera Bavel adam gadol. Tzarech iyan arei achiluk hu gadol. Shoso Talmud Chacham shespido Reish Lakish haya melamed al acherim. V'ilu hasheni hak haya lomed v'atzma. L'chein bira Rashba shemasha omra Gemara Tavitani Hilchasa b'esrim v'arba churasa ein hakavana k'divrei Rashi shehu haya melamed le'esrim v'arba shura shel talmidim el hakavana hi shereish Lakish hispid b'fnei esrim v'arba shura shel anoshim, and Reish Lakish Saftei lahu tzurmi v'rabbanan d'shchiach b'arad Yisrael d'havi tani halacha hilchasa hispid Talmud Chacham shchiach ba'aretz b'eretz Yisrael v'yablamed halachas hispid osam lomed halachas hispid osam b'yesrim v'arba shurasa shur shal noshim v'kach gam miyushav haloshin d'havi tani shalomad v'lo d'havi masni shalimed. Now, Masha of Nachman lo hispido, so mishum shelo shimesh talmidei chachamim v'hoya kisal molei sfarim. V'ilu also Talmud Chacham shespido Reish Lakish v'hoya kisal molei sfarim. Tanan Hassam, we learned in a mission at the beginning of Avos, Hillel Omer udishtamesh b'toga cholef. Person uses Keser Torah, then he's cholef over minol. He will lose his life. Tani Reish Lakish zamishtamish b'misha shona lochos Isra shel Torah. What does it mean that he's mishtamish because the Torah? He's mishtamish with someone who learns Mishnayos and has been crowned with the Kisra Shel Torah. And he takes a service from him. He gets served by him. Omar Ula Lishtamesh Inish B'Maid Tani Arba. Tamish Adam B'Mitzvah Shona Arba Sidre Mishnayos. Below Lishtamesh B'Man Demasni Arba, but not someone who learned Arba Sidre Gemara. Kaven Shemaloso Gedola. He says here that Ula disagrees with Reish Lakish, prohibits making use of a scholar who has taught Mishnah, but not one who has merely learned Mishnah. Ki had Reish Lakish avi azil bi'urcha. He was traveling on the road. Mata urkima demaya. He reached the pool of water. He couldn't cross the water. This is the same Reish Lakish who, before he came Baal Tshuva, he could jump over the water. Asahu Gavra, a person came along. Arkeve Akatve, he put Reish Lakish on his shoulders, V'kamavrle, and he took him across. He ferried him across the river. Amalei, Reish Lakish said to him, Karisa, have you learned psukim in the Torah? Amalei Karina, yes, I have learned scriptures. Tanis, did you learn the 4 Arba Sidrei Mishnah? Amalei, I'm sorry, he answered that I have learned the 4 orders of Mishnayos. Amalei, Reish Lakish said, Basalta loch arba ture v'ta'ant bar Lakish akatvech. You have hewn out for yourself 4 orders. Arba ture, meaning Arba Sidrei Mishnah, and yet you carry the son of Reish Lakish on your shoulder. Shdei bar Lakisha b'mayim, toss Reish Lakish into the water. Amalei nichali dashmeina lamar. It's a pleasure for me to serve the master. Reish Lakish said to me, Hachi gimar minai hamilston, learn something from me. In other words, Reish Lakish wanted to render the man a disciple, thereby allowing Reish Lakish to submit to the man's ministrations, his help, because it is commendable for a teacher of Torah to allow his disciples to serve him. The Omer Rab Zera, and this is what Reish Lakish taught this person. Benos Yisrael, Hein Hechmir al Atzman, Shafilu Ros Tipas Dam Kechad Bel Yoshvas Olav Shivas Nikim. So normally a Zava Gedola needs Zayin Nikim. This woman only saw Tipas Dam Kechardo. And a Zava means that she saw 3 re'iyos on 3 consecutive days. So this is impossible if she saw 1 amount of blood. But Benos Yisrael Echmir al Atzman, and the reason for that is because, let's say, during Zayin Nikim, if she sees 1 re'iyah of a Tipas Dam, that's called a Riyah Soteres, and she'll have to start counting a new Zayin Nikim. So they made it such that they would always be machmer on themselves, that in any case that they saw a Tipas Dam, they would sit Zayin Nikim. Tana Devei Eliyahu, Kol Hashona Halachos Mufta Lo Shu Ben Olam Haba. If a person learns halachos, so he's assured a place in the world to come, Shenemar, as the pasuk says in Chavakuk, Halichos Olam Lo, the ways of the world are his. Al Tikri Halichos, El Halachos. Rabbanon, learned in a brisa, and here we'll turn to Daf Chavtes, Mevatlin Talmud Torah Lo Tzasa Mes, ulachnosis kala. We'll stop for today, and Emir Hashem will continue here on the top of Chavtes on Yom Sheni. Thank you so much.